it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to have that panel. And what is really fantastic is that it is such a follow-up of the first panel. And I was reading the questions of all of you guys coming through, and I thought this is just great because these wonderful people here on the panel are going to, I think, answer quite a number of them. When we talk about innovation and when we talk about a lot of change and a lot of things that we need to do in companies, it is always, for me, which is fascinating to see how we have ideas, how we have concepts, how we think and we dream about things, and how difficult it is to really make it happen after that. So how do we go from ideas to implementation? How do we make sure things work? How often do we have to stumble before something really emerges and happens? And that's what we're going to do here with the panel, is try to see how different ventures, different concepts really were brought to life. And it is my great pleasure to have here on the panel Betsy Ziegler, Yoshi Takashige, Alex Osterwalder, and Hal Gregersen. We are a very world panel here. And I will start with Betsy. And I will tell you a little bit more about Betsy first. She is the first female CEO of a company called, do you say 1871? Okay. It is the #1 ranked incubator in the world. I know there was a question about incubators before, so listen carefully to Betsy. Before being the CEO there, she ran the Innovation Center at the Kellogg School of Management, and she was the Associate Dean of a degree program. Before that, she was at McKinsey, and she has an MBA from Harvard Business School. She's on the board of her hospital. And she's helping a lot of innovators. So Betsy, tell us about your venture and your incubator and how you brought life to that incubator.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So it's a pleasure to be here today and share our story of how we make innovation work. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, so I will hopefully not go into a coughing fit. So I lead an organization, as Denise said, called 1871. We are based in Chicago, and we are thought of as the central tech address in the city of Chicago. We opened our doors 6 years ago, and we are a not-for-profit organization. If you think about why we exist, why does 1871 exist? We exist to inspire, equip, and support founders to build great businesses. And I'll go into a little bit more about what that means in a second. Some of you might have a question about what is with the name 1871. It probably means very little to most of you. It is the year of the Chicago fire. It is the year that the city of Chicago burned down. And we, of course, are not celebrating the fact that there was a fire, right? We are celebrating what happened after the fire and the fact that people from all walks of life, all experiences, all backgrounds came together to reimagine Chicago and give rebirth to the city. And that is the philosophy we have inside of our organization. So I want you to imagine the space that we have. It's about 140,000 square feet, so 42,000 odd square meters. You walk into the space, there are 470 companies incubating at 1871 right now. About 1,500 total people. My team is a team of 25, so we have 470 companies. We have 6 venture capital firms that are headquartered in our space. We have 7 university partners, so the biggest universities in and around Chicago have physical space at 1871. We have 125 corporate partners. Some of those have physical space with us as well. And I should mention, of the 470 founders or businesses that are there, 30% of them are founded by women, which we are proud to say also matches the percentage of female founders in Chicago at 30%, which is the highest of any of the top 20 startup ecosystems in the world. And I learned last night at an event that here in Austria, the percentage of female founders is around 8%. So if you ask me a question of how did we get to 30, I will give you some hypotheses, but we see that as a starting point. At our organization, we put on 1,000 events a year and host about 400 workshops. And the magic of 1871 comes to play with the scale of all of these founders and corporate partners and venture capitalists and university and events, et cetera. The magic happens when people collide into each other. When an entrepreneur meets another entrepreneur that can help them, or one of our 500 mentors, or a venture capitalist who can help them bring their idea to life. And so I think about my job as being the greatest one in the world because my job is to increase the probability of success of any one of these founders. I'll just close with a couple thoughts on how we measure impact. We think about impact in 3 ways. The first is impact on the city of Chicago. As I mentioned, we're a not-for-profit. We do not get any governmental funding, so we have to stand on our own 2 feet. We measure impact in how many jobs have been created in the city of Chicago by companies that are currently at or are alumni of 1871. We have 400 alumni companies right now, and they have created 8,000 jobs in the city of Chicago over the last 6 years and have attracted about $350 million of follow-on capital. That, of course, only matters if that money turns into businesses that are longer standing and over time create more jobs. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, what is the 1871 effect on the companies that are incubating there? Why do we matter to them? And we measure that by success rate of those companies over time. And if you look at the number of companies that have had an origin story at 1871, there are about 700 of them that have left the space. 400 of them are still alive. So it's about a 57% or so success rate over 6 years, which far exceeds what you'd expect if a company was incubating on their own. We also have about 25 companies that have been acquired. And the third way we measure impact is our relevance for the corporates in our region. There are 36 Fortune 500 companies in Chicago, another 150 total in the Midwest region, and our job is to be the dot connector with those companies. I want to be the very first phone call. As Denise said, my history is with McKinsey as a consultant, so I want to be that very first phone call with the big companies to help them on their innovation journey. We're not a consultancy. I can't help them in that way, but we can support them on running private accelerators, on hackathons, on connecting them to companies around the world that are working on solving pain points that they themselves might have. And the way we measure impact with the companies is how they're going on their journey and sticking with them until they get to the place where they're actually implementing things that matter to them and solving their problems. I welcome you to join our story. We're 6 years in. We're still at the beginning, but I'd be happy to have welcome any of you in our space at any time in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Betsy. So our next speaker is Yoshi Takashige. And Yoshi is the Vice President Marketing Strategy and Vision at Fujitsu Limited. Yoshi has been working for Fujitsu for quite a long time as well. He worked in international businesses. He worked a lot with people and interaction with people, and he got really curious about the different people, the businesses, and the cultures around the world, and about transformation and how to transform businesses. So in 2012, he led the creation of the Fujitsu Technology and Service Vision, and it is a human-centric vision. He's going to talk more about how organizations can innovate and the human role in innovation.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. First of all, as a Japanese, I'm very happy to be here speaking because Peter Drucker is very, very popular in my country, and even younger generations know his name as a great management guru. So, can you show my slide? Well, taking this opportunity, I want to talk about the role of a vision for innovation, especially how people can drive innovation with the help of a vision. Okay, good. Anyway,
Let's continue.
how
and I will
can
sort it out.
we innovate? How can we make our company a more innovative company? Many things must be considered, of course, but the most important thing, I think, is the mindset of people. But the management cannot force people to change their mindset, but people can change by themselves if they find meaning in their work. Yeah, indeed, work has a tremendous power to give meanings for our lives, and vision comes in to give meanings for work. So let me talk about my own experience. So, as already introduced, I worked for Fujitsu for nearly 35 years. It was a fairly long journey. And 6 years ago, I was given the new responsibility to lead developing our own vision for the future business and society enabled by technology innovation. This had dual purposes. One is help our enterprise and public institution customers transform. And second, guiding our own transformation into a more innovative company in the digital age. Human-centric is our core belief. It simply means putting people at the center of everything. It is people that create innovation, and people-centric concept has a significant implication for every business today because the borders of existing industries are vanishing. And the traditional supply-centric, product-out style of business model is shifting to a new human-centric, customer-centric business model. I think organizations can drive human-centric innovation by putting people at the center, by empowering people with digital connectivity and data-driven intelligence so that people can have better experience, work more creatively, and most importantly, live fuller lives. And through human-centric innovation, we are aiming to achieve and realize a safer, more prosperous and sustainable world. We call this a human-centric intelligent society, and this is our vision. And I think a vision, shared vision, can work to align the aspirations of various stakeholders, including individuals, businesses, and community as a whole. It took for our people to embrace this new idea because we had different backgrounds and different values. But I'm very happy that today more and more colleagues in the world are being inspired by our vision. And in a global survey, the employee satisfaction survey annually, we found a very strong correlation between feeling inspired by our vision and feeling motivated to work at Fujitsu. And in addition, our customers are gradually but increasingly resonated with our vision. And together with our customers and ecosystem partners, we already jointly co-created various innovative solutions and services for shared social goals, such as enabling better urban mobility to reduce congestions and accidents, or improving the well-being of people in this aging society. For example, we are working with healthcare and biotechnology professionals to significantly accelerate the new drug discovery to fight against difficult diseases. It was our journey of transformation. We experienced this. To drive transformation, we used the power of stories because I believe stories can enable us to communicate passion and motivate people. We launched the Fujitsu technology and service vision in 2013 first and have updated it annually. This is an evolving story of articulating our vision, why we do business, how we can achieve our vision together with our customers and ecosystem partners, and what we do to drive innovation. And we did globally consistent branding based on our vision for all internal and external communications. And to help our employees to understand our vision, we provided e-learning, enablement programs, and many video messages. And the most powerful are the real customer stories of co-creating a human-centric value together. And to practice, we are conducting design thinking workshops internally as well as with our customers to craft a vision and prototype innovation. So we are still on the way of our journey, but we are moving forward step by step. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Going from inside a company venture on how to move innovation within the company, we now welcome Alex Osterwalder to speak more about his work with companies on innovation and his helicopter view on innovation and what works and what doesn't work. So Alex, you probably all of you use the business model canvas, or at least I know so many companies around the world who do that. So he's the inventor of it, the creator of it. He also created the value proposition canvas and the business portfolio map. And he has that ability to take very complex strategic problems and put them in formats that become simple in a way for people to use. Alex has won in 2015 the Strategy Award from Thinkers 50. He's currently ranked number 7 among the top 50 business thinkers of the world. And we have one thing in common, we have a PhD from the same university, so watch out the university. Alex, thank you.
Thank you. Oops. I dropped something, okay. Okay, so let's see if we can put up the slides. Who of you thinks innovation is hard? Hands up. Who of you thinks innovation is easy? Hands up. Who knows what innovation is? So I think Curtis actually put it right, that if you ask people what innovation is, there are quite a few definitions, and people probably don't talk about the same thing. And I think it's really a problem, so I like to sketch it out. Companies, for me, are, many universes, but in particular, two, exploiting businesses that you have, business models that you have proven, that got big, and exploring new ones, okay? So two very different worlds, and I almost say, okay, two very different portfolios of businesses. Here we have real businesses, here we have ideas, and if you want to break it down, kind of make it simple, you can talk about 3 types of innovation. Efficiency, like take Amazon, when they put robots into warehouses, that's efficiency innovation. Sounds futuristic, but it's the same business model, same customers, same processes. So it's important, but it's not kind of breakthrough or growth. Then you have sustaining innovation. Take Amazon. I'd say the Kindle was very simply a sustaining innovation to keep them alive, going digital. Where they really created growth is on the very left-hand side here, where they created Amazon Web Services. Now, I'm just coming out of an exercise that we did with one of the biggest airline groups, and we mapped the types of innovations they're doing. Guess where 99.9% of their innovation activities were? Over here. And they didn't even realize that they were not working on growth, which sounds very silly because these are very smart people, but it's the reality. Because when you work on crazy technology and AI, you think, wow, we're inventing the future. Well, kind of, but you're not reinventing your business model. And the problem is that business models expire across industries. So let me just introduce a little question, a little quest. And I'll stop with that, actually. If you have these two worlds, we have businesses over here, big businesses, and over here we have innovation projects that we're investing in to create the future business models, the future growth for our companies. The question is, how many projects would we need to invest in? Let's say $1 million, if you're a corporation of, I don't know, let's say 5 billion or 100 billion. How many projects would you have to invest $1 million in to create the next billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar growth engine? How many companies would you, or projects, would you have to invest in? So the question is very simple, and I want you to discuss this with your seat neighbor for 30 seconds. Okay, 30 seconds. How many projects would you need to invest in your company, about $1 million, let's say if you're a company of $5 to $20 billion, to create one growth engine over here that becomes a multi-billion-dollar business which creates your future? And how many of those will fail, okay, of all of those you invest in? For example, do I need to invest in 5 projects, $5 million, to create one multi-billion-dollar project or not? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 500? Is it 5,000? 30 seconds discussion. Let's see what you come up with. And then I'll show you the evidence. Okay, let's do this together. Let me show you the numbers. Who wants to know the solution? Who wants to know the numbers? Hands up if you want to know the numbers. Okay, not enough hands. I'm not going to show you the solution. Who wants the numbers? Who wants to know what the number is? Okay, so how many million-dollar projects would you need to invest in to create the next billion-dollar growth engine or unicorn? It's actually 250. 250, not ideas, okay? Not ideas. Ideas are free, they're everywhere. 250, let's say, million-dollar projects. How many will fail? 162. 162. And 87 will know some success. So the first thing I want you to take away from this is, you can't pick the winners. When we're talking about growth innovation, it's incredibly hard to pick the winner without investing in the losers, okay? So what does that bring me to? The statistics, I'll show you some proof. If you look at early stage venture capital, which is the best proxy, turns out that 65% of investments don't return capital. So you invest 100, you don't get 100 back. 25%, they give you a 1 to 5x return. You put in 100, you get maybe 500 back. So where do we get those unicorns, or those that really create growth? It's a small number. So you need to work on many different projects to get the next growth engine. Now, of course, if you're doing process innovation, you don't have the same number. If you're doing new product with the same business model, probably not 250. But the more you're trying to create the next Amazon Web Services for your company, the more projects you need to invest in. So here's the problem for companies. When CEOs, when leaders invest in projects, what do they expect? That the team succeeds. But you can't. Some teams will not succeed. So the biggest problem in innovation is actually that you need to encourage those who lose, who don't get follow-up investments, that they're winners because they contribute to the system. So what we need more of in companies is this venture mentality. And back to what Yoshi said, this is what people will come up with, but not everybody will be the next growth engine. So we need to find a way to encourage people. Now, the ideas usually come bottom up. But what's the role of leadership? It's to create the system top down for this to be possible. Because in most companies today, you fail, you're fired. You fail, you jeopardize your career. But look at this. If you really want to create growth in your company, you have to actually have projects that fail. Now, of course, you need to manage this kind of failure with small investments first, small bets, and you continuously increase the bets with the evidence you get that the teams are on the right path. Which means you start maybe with 250, you give them $5,000, and then you narrow it down, 20%. And then of those 20%, you take another 20%. Some companies are starting to do this beyond, obviously, the innovator Amazon. Companies like Bayer or Bosch, they're starting to have these kind of internal funds where they invest in their people and they create the ecosystem internally for those people to thrive. So I think that's the big challenge in innovation in companies today, to create that kind of ecosystem for people to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. We now turn to Hal Gregersen, and he is going to also bring a very different angle on how to look at innovation and how to make innovation more successful in that process. So Hal is a professor at MIT. He is a senior lecturer in the leadership and innovation at Sloan School. He is a very productive author as well. He's written many books, 10 of them. His latest book about creative inquiry is going to be available tomorrow for those who want. But he's going to talk us more about that book, the content of that book, and inquiry, and how that can make innovation successful. Before teaching at MIT, he also taught at INSEAD and at London Business School and many other places, and we are so grateful to have you on board. So do you want to come up and tell us more about creative inquiry?
Love to. I'm going to stand on this side, that way I don't have to walk to that side. I had a reflection this morning. 30 years ago, I studied with colleagues globalization, where a global leader will land in a new country and have to figure out what to do and how to do it when they don't know what anything is going on. 20 years ago, I studied transformation and change, which is effectively the same thing, landing in a new space and trying to figure it out. And then 10 years ago, with Clayton Christensen and Jeff Dyer, studied innovation and how do you lead innovation. And there was this consistent thread through all of those works over the past 3 decades. All of those leaders, globalization, transformation, innovation, were always operating on the edge of the possible. It was an edge full of uncertainty. And I realized this morning as I was listening to the first panel that digital transformation is in many ways a convergence of all 3 of those things, globalization, transformation, innovation, all in the same dose. And that means that uncertainty is probably at its highest ever level and will be. And globalization failures were 80% in the 80s, 90s. Transformation failures, the data is about 80% fail. Innovation failures, in one sense, are about the same. And so at the core of all of those leadership worlds I just described, every one of those best leaders in those spaces, literally interviewing hundreds of them at each stage, all of them excelled at asking the right question. When we are operating on the edge of uncertainty, questions matter far more than answers. Peter Drucker knew this better than all of us. In the 1950s, he said, the real and important job and difficult job is not to find the right answers, it is to find the right questions. So now I have a test for you, in the spirit of Alex's test with your partner next to you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. That is it. You have a 15-second elevator pitch. Pretend you're going in those elevators out in this hallway, up and down. You've got 15 seconds to tell your story. Here's the story I want you to tell the person next to you. Explain to them what they should do today in order to ask a better question. In other words, tell me, what do I do to ask a better question? How do I do that? 15 seconds, go. Okay, time is up, folks. Here we go. Here's my question. How many of you are highly confident in your answer to the person next to you? Raise your hand, please. Honestly. I have asked this question of thousands of leaders all over the world for the last 5 years, and it's rarely more than 5% of the hands that go up in the room. We all know that questions matter, but we don't know how to ask the better question. And so for the last 5 years, I've been interviewing folks like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Benioff at Salesforce, Nick Baton at ASOS, and the list goes on, asking them the same question. And what it came down to is these folks are creators of conditions where the right questions emerge. They do not walk around the world with a list of questions in their pockets. They are deeply context sensitive, and they are actively seeking passive data. This term from Clayton Christensen, actively seeking passive data in 3 unique conditions. They seek out people and places where they are unexpectedly wrong, where they are uncomfortably uncomfortable, and where they are reflectively quiet. These are not the conditions most of us are involved with de facto by the work we normally do. We have to actively seek it. And if you were to shadow or follow any innovative leader, you would find them day in and day out actively creating those 3 conditions in their own work, in the work of the people around them, and even in their homes and communities. 3 quick stories. Fadi Gondor, founder of Aramex, Jordanian by birth, company started in Jordan. Fadi is running Aramex, which is a logistics company like DHL, FedEx, and UPS. He's 10 plus years into the business. He's rich, he's wealthy, he's charismatic, he's the CEO founder. He has every reason to be right, comfortable, and very vocal. He lands in Dubai 2 o'clock in the morning. He's got a meeting at 8 o'clock. He has a decision. How do I get to the hotel? How would you get to the hotel? Most of us would probably get the quickest Uber or taxi we could because we want to go to sleep. Not Fadi. He asks an Aramex delivery truck driver in an Aramex delivery truck to pick him up at the airport. And when he's being driven to his hotel, he asks all sorts of questions and he shuts up. He gets all kinds of passive data that he otherwise wouldn't get, and he learns that there are things operating in that region that cause this driver to not be able to do his job the way he should. And the next day, he opens up a forum just like this with all the local leaders and local folks, no retribution for failure in the room, and they dig deep to figure out what's really going on with questions and answers. Example number 2. That's Fadi doing that over and over. His team does that over and over. They're actively seeking passive data by creating those 3 conditions, being wrong, uncomfortable, and quiet. Example number 2 is Ed Catmull at Pixar. He is, to me, the master questioner on planet Earth. He's trained as a PhD computer scientist. He is a problem solver at heart. His world operates by asking questions. It's what caused him and the teams around him to do the first fully animated, full-length feature film by computer generation years ago. And they did then, and they do now, what they've done. They call it at Pixar the Brain Trust, at Disney the Story Trust, and the short version of it is the following. It is a space where directors who are at the top of their game, like the director of Ralph Wrecks the Internet from Disney and the recent Incredibles 2 that came out from Pixar, they create these spaces, these rooms, these places where the directors walk into them, and they know when they walk into that room they will have 3 hours of nonstop critique, full of questions about why are they doing what they're doing. Brad Bird, who did the Incredibles 2 movie 8 years ago, walked into that brain trust, pitched his idea, and for 3 hours heard how it sucked. With all kinds of positive and negative feedback, but mostly negative, he did that over and over. Questions are being just thrown at these directors in order for them to see something they otherwise couldn't see. It is a wrong, uncomfortable, and they are forced to be reflectively quiet moment. It's the only way they make the movies they do so great as they do it. They systematically create the space where those conditions of being wrong, uncomfortable, and quiet flourish, not flounder. Now, I could go through 20, 30 other examples. Keyence Corporation in Japan, ASOS in the UK. They all have systematically figured out where and when are we asking those sorts of questions? Where and when are creating those conditions that are not normal for most of us as leaders? And so that's my suggestion to you going forward, yourself, with the teams around you. Where and when do you do that? Because it's in those spaces when the toughest questions get asked, and the tough questions are the keys that open up the windows to what we don't know. And that's the space from which every disruptive growth idea comes. People outside of the companies who are asking the questions we don't ask they've done exactly what I'm suggesting that we need to do inside our companies. Final point's the following. This is not, to me, just about my work as an individual leader, creating these conditions for questions to flourish. It's not my job as a leader it's not only my job to do it for myself, but for those around me. But it can play out in the most unexpected circumstances. 20 years ago, I discovered a method I call the question burst, where essentially, let's pretend you and I are sitting at lunch, and we're talking about a challenge you might be facing at work or at home. You have 2 minutes to explain to me your challenge. And then I'm going to take 4 minutes with you. We're going to get a piece of paper and a pen, and we're going to both generate as many questions as we possibly can. No answers during that 4 minutes, no explanations about the questions, and we just generate questions. At the end of that 4 minutes, where I'm forced to shut up, to be reflectively quiet, no answers, at the end of 4 minutes, we'll have about 20 questions. 80% of us sitting in that conversation will have reframed our idea. We realized we're a little bit wrong. 80% of us will feel better about the optimism of the future. 80% of us will have an idea to solve the problem we otherwise wouldn't have had. 4 fast minutes. Because we've created conditions that are artificial around being uncomfortable and wrong and quiet. And I'm going to give you a final example about when I did this at lunch with a colleague who I was coaching and working with. This is a non-work example. His challenge was his oldest daughter is turning 13 years old. And he had a great relationship with her until she was 13 and she started to pull away. The relationship started to deteriorate. And he was worried. How can I keep this relationship strong? We ended up doing, I'm weird, don't go to lunch with me. We did a question burst, 4 minutes on a napkin table, 20 questions of how else might you approach this? And at the end of that 4 minutes, his initial question was, how can I keep my relationship with my daughter strong? At the end of that 4 minutes, his question was, how can I help my daughter be her? That's a very different question. And ironically, it sustained their relationship. That's the point of these catalytic questions, that surface false assumptions that take us with energy to places we otherwise wouldn't go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Rebounding on your comment on questioning where you get wrong and how important that is. Yoshi, in your process over this past 5 years, it was not such a wonderful curve as the ones you've shown that was going up all the way. I guess that you've seen many instances when things went wrong. So can you tell us a little bit about the hurdles and what you've seen there?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. So the vision is very powerful to move people, but at the same time there are difficult things. We faced some difficulty in managing the gap between the vision and everyday business and scale the transformation. So there is always a gap between the vision and our everyday business, of course. And people are easily frustrated if we cannot deliver tangible results right away. But it always happens. And moreover, we have very diverse business portfolios ranging from computing and telecom products to IT services and digital technologies such as AI. We have customers in all industries in the world, but our own capabilities and skills still somehow differ by countries and regions. So there's again a gap. So how can we manage that? So we need to develop some practicable stories, strategies, and real solutions to bridge the gap between the high-level vision and our business. It is really tough. No one can do this alone. So this must be taken up by colleagues in each country and in each business unit. And we are still struggling, but I'm very happy that with the help of the guidance from the management, many colleagues are proactively working to develop the visions, strategies, and roadmaps for each business, such as finance, retail, or mobility, and more. And I'm sure, I'm confident that we will be able to manage.
And because there was also a question from the audience, when you encounter those hurdles and those difficulties, do you try to solve them internally, or do you ask consultants, external people to come and help you brainstorm, find the right questions, find what doesn't work?
Yes, sure. The innovation process is we cannot rely on our internal resources alone. We always need to have ecosystem partners, insights from the outside, the thought leaders. So we are helped by many thought leaders, and that's really helpful. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Betsy, you work not only with startup companies and not only in the incubator, you also work with a number of organizations, taking the learning from the startups to also implement that in companies. So can you take us through what you can do with companies and how you help them through the innovation process?
Sure. So we work with companies along a huge amount of dimensions. The area I think I'll focus on, both Hal and Alex have talked about it, but the pace of change today is never been higher than it is, right? Today is going to be the slowest day you'll have for the rest of your life. You probably have heard that before. If not, let that sink in for just a second. The rate of, the level of ambiguity, the level of complexity is never higher. And innovation is scary for lots of companies. You know, a lot of the companies, leadership teams that I talk to don't know where to start, don't know how to think about it. And in my opinion, the most successful companies are the ones that should be most worried about disruption, because if you're already starting to feel the threats of disruption or that your revenue is starting to change, it's almost too late, right? Then you need an emergency phone call to Alex to have his team come with the business model, work and strategy to help fix it. But the coaching that we give them is around 4 dimensions. So the first is, obviously, the CEO has to be deeply engaged in thinking through this problem. The second is to really do a deep dive look at incentives and how are the incentives working in the organization. Are they actually making your employees' life better or worse, or creating the conditions for them to come up with new ideas and to explore new opportunities? The third is around vocabulary, a shared vocabulary across businesses. So, if you're at Fujitsu and you've got all these different business model lines, and if you're in your drone flying above the organization, right, so no longer the bird's eye view, but we'll talk about the drone's eye view now, and you were to look inside of different business units, things are probably working pretty well, but where issues arise is when you're trying to work across the business units, and a lot of that is because lacks a shared vocabulary or a shared metric that you're being held accountable for. And the last piece is around on failure, and Alex and Hal both talked about this, but encouraging productive experimentation and encouraging sort of a reward system about what you learned from something that you tried that didn't work, right, versus this failure point. If the organizations I work with do not solve the failure point, nothing will move forward. In this notion of developing more of an innovative entrepreneurial capability inside of organizations, I think, is one of the most important management challenges we have going forward.
Yeah. The notion of failure is really quite interesting, because so many new inventions and innovation in the world started by exploring something completely different. And then by mistake, it happened to be something different. There's so many examples of that. I remember one example of somebody wanting to do laser dentistry, and realizing that the laser beam was too strong and it was always exploding the teeth. And that technology, it was wrong, and it was so difficult, and it was always bumping against the wall. But it ended up being the perfect technology for IVF medication and really the implementation of embryo. So hurdles are really important. Mistakes are important, but continuing that is important. So Hal, when you encounter those hurdles, what kind of questions can you ask? How can you continue when you are at the bottom and you've spent so many years working in one direction, and you don't know if what you have in your hands is going to be a big success? Or when do you know when to stop and when to continue? Do you have magical questions?
I wish. To me, whether it's work or life, when we hit that vortex of darkness, when we're truly stuck, at the very core of that we're stuck because we're simply asking the wrong question. And when we hit that bottom of that vortex of stuckedness, almost always we're also isolated. And to me, isolation is the enemy of innovation. And so if I think of my habits, my patterns, my interactions, my travel, my work, the more isolated I become, the more likely I am to be answer-centric and stuck on the question I've got. And so whether it's using a simple question burst method, which has the results of 80%, it'll start moving me out of that hole. It does that because I start to suspend convictions and ask different questions. And the more powerful condition then becomes, okay, whom else could I talk to? Where else could I be out of my isolation bubble that I myself would end up feeling uncomfortable and realizing I'm wrong about this, and in some ways forced to be a little bit quiet? Because, the thing with that process of being wrong, uncomfortable, and quiet is that for most of us, we are very uncomfortable with solitude and quietness and reflectiveness. But again, when we're operating at that edge of uncertainty, when things feel the darkest, when we're most stuck, that's the space in which, if we actively seek out this passive data, talk to other people who aren't like us, get in places where it's surprisingly different, like this place or the Drucker Forum tomorrow, those are the spaces from which the new question will emerge.
Can I build on that? Because I think the question we might not be asking is, should we kill this project?
Should we what?
Should we kill this project? Right? We kind of we think, we need to get to that solution. We need to find the answers. Well, at one point it might be, okay, should we kill this and then work on something else? There's this fear of not finding those answers. It's okay sometimes, right? Just let go. So I think that's the challenge that we have today in corporations, is that everything needs to be a success. Like at one point, let's move on. We have 200 projects we're working on. It's okay if 200 fail, if one is the outlier and actually helps us succeed. So I think this one-size-fits-all decision-making, and to what you were saying, it's different questions you ask in an execution business than you ask when you're exploring, right? So the same questions don't apply in different areas. So we need to change our KPIs when it comes to exploration. And just, it's okay to stop a project, but it can't be career suicide. That's why we need to change the KPIs. You build a new warehouse, you fail, you should be fired. You're working on a new idea, you fail, well, that's just part of innovation. It's exploration. I asked the questions, couldn't find a direction, let's work on the next project. So the best companies, back to what Bill said, they take talent and they don't turn them into mediocre people who can't explore innovation. They give them this space. I think I heard the word space and conditions quite a lot. Yeah. That's the challenge today. And it starts from the top. Most CEOs, their space is execution. That's why they're called chief execution officers. Yeah. But today, competition comes from innovation. Rita was saying, you can't talk strategy without innovation. There's no space today, a legitimate space to do strategic innovation.
Can I add one real quick thing? It's just, in the spirit of what you're saying, Alex, it's like, in my world, in my team's world, in my organization's world, where are the toughest questions getting asked? And if we don't have an answer to that, we are not going to disrupt or grow our business in ways that you're talking about. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to suggest is that space creation where it's safe enough to ask the tough questions that people they're talking about at the water cooler, but they're not saying it at the strategic planning meeting of the C-suite leaders. Yeah.
Wonderful. I just wanted to see if there are a few questions, and I have a few questions on the iPad, but I wanted also to see if we can engage in a dialogue with the room. So if there are a few questions, there's a microphone that can circulate, so if you want if you prefer to go this way, we can. to make it more interactive. Otherwise, I still have quite a bit of questions here. Anyone wants to ask a question directly?
Nobody wants to fail.
Everyone wants to fail. Yeah, okay.
All right, I'll see if I can fail. It is about failure, and in many organizations, you have a chief technology officer, and there might be one or two in the room. And of course, none of you, if so, would ever be eligible for this, but there's a lot of talk about that the CTO sometimes is an obstacle to innovation. And I know none of you, of course, here, but it could be because of the not invented here syndrome, and we've tried it before. Any comment on that, please?
I have a very quick comment. The CTO is actually the enemy of innovation because it's old-style innovation. It's about technology innovation, improving what you're already doing. What we don't have is a chief entrepreneur. So I don't actually see the CEO necessarily as the enemy of innovation. There just should be another role, and another chief, of course, is never the solution, but somebody who really takes innovation seriously. And it's rarely, from my perspective, the CTO. From every company I've seen, the CTO has actually actively bombarded the new type of innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. Yes, there is another question over there.
And I have a quick response. While the microphone's coming around, I think it's always intriguing to ask the CEO, how does she or he actually solve a problem? And if their problem-solving process is largely office-based, headquarter-centric, game's over. And so it's actively getting up, getting out, getting into the world. You can see whether or not it works by how they do their problem-solving work.
Okay. Alex, I very much respect and admire the work you do and the sympathetic way that you communicate it across. I do think there's the danger that we may draw the wrong conclusion from your chart, where you said, put out 1,000 projects, invest 1 million in each, and you'll get 4 unicorns. And I think the fallacy could be, if the same people, the same team, with the same methods, in the same cultural frame, would do 1,000 projects, they would still fail, just like they failed at the first. So it's diversity, and I'm sure you mean that as well. It's diversity in every conceivable way that produces and generates the conditions for innovation. Would you have a comment on that?
So, yeah, for sure. I mean, I 100% buy into that. Talking about talent that came up two, 3 times, I think one thing that we don't accept enough yet is that managing a business and creating a business are 2 very different worlds. It's not the same job. It's not the same tools. It's not the same questions, right? It's not the same conditions. So what we're lacking is a space where those people can thrive. I don't think companies have a lack of ideas. I don't think they have a problem with innovation talent. I don't think they have a problem with diversity. What they don't have, from my experience, my small window on the world, 99% of the companies I work with, they have a lack of space. And when I mean space, it's not physical, it's a cultural space, it's KPIs, it's this, of course, not 1 million and then maybe one of those will succeed. It's multiple investments where you start with $5,000, then 20% of the teams maybe get $50,000, 20% of the teams get $1 million, right? It's that whole different world. It's the space that's missing. I buy into everything you say, but, back to what Rita said about agenda, when you look at the CEO's agenda and there's not 20 to 40% time dedicated to innovation, getting out of the building, talking to non-customers, understanding the world, guess what? No innovation is going to happen in the company. So I think that's the challenge at the top, that those conditions for bottom-up ideas and talents to flourish doesn't exist. In 99% of the companies I'm in, I'd say that's still a very big challenge. So I don't work with Amazon. So.
And by this, does that mean that maybe we should look at different ways to organize organizations so that we have the traditional management leadership stream on one side and we have the more creative, innovative, entrepreneurial stream on another side, because both of them need a very different ecosystem to be able to strive, and a different hierarchy and a different system there?
I think in some ways that's true, but we've done for 10 years an analysis with Forbes and Credit Suisse around the most innovative companies in the world based on an innovation premium as a financial metric. And in those companies that are the best of the best, inside of those, these senior leaders actually have innovation capital, and underneath that is a questioning capital. They can ask questions other people can't ask because they know how to deliver on the questions they ask. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we would want to strip out innovation and questioning capacity from the top, but in fact, it's a bit of the opposite.
Yeah, I sort of agree that it is very difficult for a large organization like Fujitsu to do the both innovation and operation. Operation is we cannot fail, so failure is prohibited. So we really need totally different incentives for people, talent. So in that sense, that we need to have some space for innovation inside a big organization, and we are doing that.
Fantastic.
Can I add something? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
So again, it's looking in our own world and figuring out where's the space and what's the process. And so Amazon's process is totally different than Pixar's. It's just like they have a very different space and place. Yeah. Amazon Web Services, Prime Now, and a variety of other their major innovations came from what they call a working backwards process, where anybody in the system can have an idea that they think could make the organization or something for the customer better. They write up a document that says, here's the press release 5 years from now that will be the success of this idea, and here's 6 pages of questions and answers about the particular idea that our best guess as to why it would work and why it wouldn't. They then sit in a room with 5 or 6 other people who read that document for 10 minutes quietly, and they know after the reading time, it's question and answer time, and they know they're going to get tough questions over and over and over. Everybody in the system can create and deliver on these documents. The top 3 leaders underneath Jeff Bezos at Amazon are busy people, arguably. Every year, individually, they themselves review 100+ of these working backwards documents. Mm-hmm. That's deep commitment in the spirit of that 20 to 40%. But it's their process. They're a writing culture that creates questions a different way.
Okay. Yeah. Betsy, do you see that as well in the companies that you see? Not necessarily the startups, because I guess the startups will have a lot of those questions and they would work more on that. But the companies you work with, do you also see different cultures in terms of asking questions and the curiosity that people have in those organizations?
Yeah, I would say that I see a wide variety of things happening, and there's a whole bunch of innovation theater goes on that I see, which is where people show up and working with us with sort of a check-the-box mentality, and they came to an innovation day, and they talked to 6 startups, and they went through what they talked about what the future could look like, but they have no intention whatsoever of doing anything with that information, but they feel better because they participated in that event. The startups that participate in that, of course, do not feel good and feel like they were in an entrepreneurial petting zoo and, got sort of gawked at and poked and prodded, but no value added was there. So we're working really hard to try to say no to innovation theater and work with companies in a different way and try to get a sense of their commitment, asking them some questions up front about what are you really trying to do? Where is the CEO involved in this? Who is engaged? How are you going to hold yourself accountable to go through this type of engagement? We kind of how I'd see it.
Yeah, wonderful. We're reaching the end. So for me, the big take is the fact that the mindset is so important. How inquisitive are we? How willing are we to go into failure, even if it is painful, but make that part of the natural process? And how do we let creativity, innovation, ideas, even if they are completely weird and silly and seem bizarre at the beginning, to go there, to help that flourish in organization? So curiosity, flexibility, mindset behind organization, and the whole organization together. A big applause to the panel.